What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Dragonknight. So the Magicka Dragonknight is definitely one of those DPS classes that you don't see being used very often, and that's mainly because instead of competing with ranged Magicka DPS spots in raid teams, you're competing more with melee spots, because most Magicka Dragonknight abilities require you to be within about 8 meters to 10 meters of the boss in order for you to use them, which pretty much puts you exactly within melee range. So really the Magicka DK is in this weird sort of spot where they use Magicka as their primary damaging resource, but they have to compete with stamina DPS because they have to eat up that melee spot. And so Magicka DKs, while they can do very good DPS, you have to consider the fact that they are competing with stamina Nightblades, stamina Wardens, other stamina DPS basically for that melee spot in a raid team. And so a lot of raid leads, this is more for end game trial groups, the ones that are pushing for score, typically will not really be looking at taking along a Magicka DK in most instances. That being said, like I mentioned earlier, the Magicka DK can still pull very good DPS, and in the right hands, a Magicka DK can bring a lot of utility to the group and kind of open up some flexibility for the Dragonknight tank, mainly because now the Dragonknight tank doesn't really have to keep an eye on Engulfing Flames anymore, because that's provided by the Magicka DK. So generally speaking, the Magicka DK is definitely a very fun class to play. I personally enjoy playing it. It's probably my second most favorite DPS to play, right next to the Magicka Warden. But if you're going for those really high-end score-running guilds, Magicka DK is not going to be one of those classes you're going to want to use. Again, because you are competing with stamina Nightblades for that melee spot, and Magicka DKs, while they can do very good DPS, they just don't compete with stamina Nightblades in terms of raw DPS potential. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. We will take some time to talk about some alternative gear sets, where they come from, why you should use them, when you should use them, that sort of thing. And we'll go over our gear. Then we'll talk about a rotation, and then we'll finish things off with a 6-man dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS you can pull using a Magicka DK. So starting things off here first, as usual, with our gear. So in terms of Monster Helm sets and gear-wise, pretty much nothing has really changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone. No new sets have been introduced that have really kind of outshined any of the other sets that were introduced in the Wrathstone dungeons. So a lot of the sets you're going to be seeing here are pretty much exactly the same as they were in Murkmire. So for our Monster Helm set, we're going with Zaan. Zaan is going to be the best option for you as a Magicka DK. You are always within that 8 meters radius, because most of your abilities need to be used within that 8 meter distance, so Zaan is naturally the best choice. It's a very, very powerful Monster Helm set, and unlike some ranged DPS, you are pretty much always going to be within the 8 meters, unless you need to play mechanics or something like that, in which case you might move a little bit away from 8 meters. That being said, Zaan is a DLC Monster Helm set, so you will need to have the Dungeon Bones DLC in order to grab this, because this does come from Scalecaller Peak. Now, if you do not have access to the Dragon Bones DLC, you can use Grothdarr instead. This is the base game Monster Helm set, so you can get this from Vaults of Madness. Pretty easy dungeon overall, even on event, and this is going to be the strongest Monster Helm set for you to run here. Compared to Zaan, it does deal less DPS overall, but if you can't get Zaan because either you don't have the DLC or you don't have the capability of completing that Scalecaller just yet, you can just run with Grothdarr instead. Grothdarr is still very, very powerful, and unlike Zaan, it does have a cleave component to it, so for trash pulls, Grothdarr will give you a little bit more DPS compared to Zaan. Now, for our body set, we are going with Siroria. Siroria is still one of the strongest sets in the game right now for Magicka DPS. So this can be obtained by clearing Cloud Rest. So if you want the perfect version, you will have to clear Vet Cloud Rest. The armor comes from +1, jewelry comes from +2 and +3. So I have the perfect version here, so you don't need to run a perfect version. So you can farm the non-perfect version from just normal Cloud Rest. This is pretty easy to complete. The difference between the perfect and the imperfect version is that 5-piece max Magicka bonus, which doesn't really add all too much DPS, maybe about 1% or so DPS on average. So you can really run whichever set you happen to get first, whether that's imperfect or the perfect version here. Now for our second set, we are going with Spell Strategist. Again, a very strong set. This is a base game set. It's a PvP Rewards of the Worthy set. So you can either get this from your Rewards of the Worthy coffer that you get from every 20k AP that you gain, or you can buy this off of Guild Traders. Very powerful. This is typically going to be used as a front bar set here because the proc does carry over to your back bar. So we have jewelry, and the front bar is our spell strategist. So this is definitely going to be the stronger setup here, Siroria and spell strategist here. This will give you the best single target DPS out of most of the gear combinations in the game right now. Now there are some other gear options for you to choose from, especially if you don't have access to like summer sets, so you can't necessarily run Siroria. The first set is going to be Burning Spellweave. So this is a base game set. You can get this from City of Ash, either 1 or 2. This is probably one of the stronger sets for Magicka DKs, although not necessarily the strongest set, mainly because the proc condition for the 5-piece is when you deal damage to flame damage. So pretty much all of your damaging abilities are going to be flame damage. So because of that, you have very good uptime with Burning Spellweave. It's very common to see 64, 65, 66% uptime on Burning Spellweave. So it's a very powerful set to use as a Magicka Dragonknight here. So you can run this on the body, or you can run this as a front bar set, just because it is a proc set, so it will carry over to your back bar, so you can really pick whether you want it on the body or you want it on the front bar set there. Another set that you might want to consider running, let me see if I can find it here. There's a lot of sets here that I have. Somewhere. Mother's Sorrow. Mother's Sorrow is a static bonus to the 5-piece, so you're going to want this on their body. This is a light armor set that is dropped from Deshaan, so you can farm it from Deshaan, or you can buy it off of Guild Traders. So like I said, the 5-piece is a static bonus, so you will need to ideally have this on your body, so that way you have that additional spell crit the whole time you are wearing this. That being said, Mother Sorrow is not particularly strong on a Mag DK compared to something like Burning Spellweave or the next set that we're going to be talking about, Silks of the Sun. And that's mainly because Dragon Knights, unlike Templars and Nightblades, don't have 10% additional crit damage. So the spell crit is still a very strong addition to your kind of DPS, but it's not going to give you quite as much return compared to like on a Nightblade or a Templar, because you are missing out on that 10% additional crit damage. But it's still a very strong set. It's a very easy set to obtain. So it's definitely something that you might want to consider running if you don't have Siroria. The other set that I mentioned here is, where is it? Silks of the Sun. So this is a light armor set that you can get from Stonefall. So again, base game set. You can buy it off Guild Traders, you can farm it yourself, it's kind of up to you. So this adds a flat 400 spell damage to your flame damage abilities. Now Dragon Knight, pretty much again, almost all of your damage is going to be flame damage abilities. There's probably only a very small portion that is not flame damage, so you're getting pretty much the full 400 spell damage on pretty much all of your abilities. Now, Silk of the Sun does have the max health armor bonus as a 2-piece, so you're basically losing out on one component of your kind of maximizing your DPS in terms of set bonuses. But that being said, the extra health does kind of help out a little bit, because it does, give you a little bit of survivability, which is nice to have, so you can run all Magicka enchants, so you don't necessarily have to worry about your health if you are wearing Silks of the Sun, because you do have that additional health there. That being said though, it will not pull as much DPS compared to something like Burning Spellweave, just because Burning Spellweave, the 2, 3, and 4-piece are all DPS focused, so you're not losing an armor set bonus that way. That being said though, Silks of the Sun does have very nice synergy with Magicka DKs, and it's a very easy set to obtain, very cheap set to obtain while you're trying to get things like Siroria or Burning Spellweave. So those are your primary kind of alternative sets that you can run if you don't have Spell Strategist or Siroria farmed up just yet. Another set that you might want to run, you have 2 crafted sets that I don't have on hand here. Just because I don't have the sets on here. So the first one is going to be, let me see if I can find it here. It is Law of Juliana. So this is a crafted set that you can craft from Grothdarr. So because it's a crafted set, you can either craft it yourself if you have access to the Grothdarr DLC. You don't have access to the Grothdarr DLC though, you can pay somebody, usually a small fee, to craft it for you, or you can just buy it off of Guild Traders. So this is a 6 trait set, so you will need to know 6 traits in whatever piece you want to craft it in, so just bear that in mind if you are going to be crafting this yourself. Very similar to Mother Sorrow, the 5-piece is a flat bonus. It's a static bonus, so you want to wear Julianos on your body. Now the advantage of running Julianos is that because it's a crafted set, you can run heavy chest and medium legs to basically maximize your resistances, so it does give you a little bit more survivability if you are running Julianos, but it will be outperformed by Spell Strategist and Siroria, so that's just something you want to keep in mind there. Another set that you might want to consider running, let me see if I can find it here. They're not really, it should be Mechanical Acuity. So this is another crafted set, so this is 6 traits, so very similar to Juliano's. You need to know 6 traits in order to craft whatever piece you want in Mechanical Acuity. This is in the Clockwork City DLC, so you need to have access to Clockwork City DLC if you want to craft this yourself, but like Juliano's, you can pay somebody to craft it for you, or you can buy it off of guild traders. So with the kind of buff to Shadow Mundus, Mechanical Acuity has kind of made a comeback because it basically gives you 100% chance to crit for 5 seconds every 18 seconds when you deal direct damage. So it's very, very nice. Now you do lose 1 armor kind of set bonus because the 2-piece is weapon damage, which is pretty much useless on a Magicka DPS, essentially. So very similar to Silks of the Sun, you are losing that armor bonus there. However, the 5-piece bonus, depending on how much crit you're running, is actually very, very strong. So if you're averaging, like, let's say 50% crit or so, the 5-piece is effectively giving you 50% crit at whatever 5/18 is in terms of fractional. So it's probably around 26-25% uptime. So that's still very strong. So in terms of just the amount of DPS that you're able to get with Mechanical Acuity, it's quite a significant margin. It's not quite as strong compared to like on a Nightblade or a Templar because again, Dragon Knights don't have 10% additional crit damage, but it's still a strong set to consider running, especially if you are going to be using the Shadow Mundus. Now in terms of armor traits, jewelry traits, enchants, everything like that, so all of our armor is Divines here, so you can go with Infused on the large pieces. DPS difference between Infused on large versus Divines on large, it's going to be very, very small. You're talking about probably a 1/10 of a percentage point or even less than that. So it's really whatever traits you happen to pick up first, either the Divines or Infused. You have all max Magicka enchants. For our jewelry, we have all spell damage enchants, and we're running all Bloodthirsty. Now, Dragon Knights don't have an execute, so Bloodthirsty is not quite as strong on a Dragon Knight as it is on, let's say, a Nightblade that does have an execute. That being said, though, Bloodthirsty is going to give you probably going to give you the highest amount of DPS. The other option for jewelry trait is going to be Infused. So Infused, Bloodthirsty, any sort of combination between those 2 traits are a good combination there. I like going 3 Bloodthirsty just because it gives you the most DPS, but you can run Infused instead. Obviously, if you don't have access to Somerset expansion, then you can't transmute your jewelry, so you'll have to stick with Arcane otherwise. For weapons, our front bar is infused with a flame damage enchant, and our back bar is infused with an absorb Magicka enchant. There have been no changes to Magicka DK Sustain, so Magicka DK Sustain is still one of the worst out of all the 10 possible DPS specs. The only one that's probably worse than the Magicka DK at this point is going to be the Magicka Sorcerer, the non-heavy attack, so light attack Magicka Sorcerer. So you do want to have this absorb Magicka enchant on the back bar. So even if you're running, in this instance I am running Parse Food, so if you're running things like Witchmothers or Clockwork Filet and you're getting orb support, even with the Absorb Magicka enchant, you will still need to use balance in order to sustain a light attack rotation. So Magicka DK sustain is really, really terrible, so you do want to have that Absorb Magicka enchant there on the back bar to help you sustain a full light attack rotation for as long as you can. Now, for our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf, so Dark Elves are no longer the best race for Magicka DPS, especially Magicka Dragonknights, just because they lost that sort of 7% additional flame damage. So now that has been replaced with 258 flat spell damage. That is affected by other modifiers, though, so it's not just 258, it is 258 times whatever your modifiers are, typically 30%, 20 from major sorcery, 10 from minor sorcery. The strongest race is actually going to be the High Elves, because the High Elves get 2000 max Magicka and 258 spell damage. Dark Elves get 1875 max Magicka and 258 spell damage. That being said, if you do want to run a Stam DK, if you want to kind of flip-flop between Stamina and Magicka, Dark Elves also get 1875 max Stamina and 258 weapon damage. So if you want to flip-flop a little bit, then Dark Elves are the best option there. If you want to just go pure Magicka, then the Altmer are going to be the best option. Now, one race that I do want to bring up here is going to be the Bretons. So the Bretons get 2000 max Magicka, and they get 7% cost reduction on all of their Magicka abilities, along with 100 Magicka regen. On a class like a Magicka Dragonknight, where you're really starved for Magicka in longer fights, the Breton might be a decent option. The 7% additional cost reduction on your Magicka abilities is a huge boost to sustain on top of the 100 Magicka regen that you get from the passive there. So Bretons are definitely an option that you really want to consider for Magicka DK, mainly because of that sustain issue that Magicka Dragonknights have. The last race option that you might want to consider running is going to be the Khajiits. They get 10% additional crit damage. So basically it acts as basically like you're a Nightblade or a Templar. You get a 10% additional crit damage. They get 825 max health, stamina, and magicka. So you get a little bit of all three resources, and you get a little bit of all three regen as well. So you get 85 stamina, magicka regen, and 100 health regen. So Khajiits kind of fit that sort of hybrid race. So if you want to do stam DK, if you want to maybe be a healer, because you also get 10% additional crit healing done, or if you want to be a tank, then Khajiits might be a good race for you to choose from. But the best race overall is going to be Ultimate for Magicka DKs, and Dark Elves being very close behind. For attributes, all points into max magicka. Not a surprise there, you want to maximize your DPS. If you want original survivability, you can shift a few points from magicka into health. I personally would not recommend putting any more than 10 points into health, just because at that point you're giving up too much DPS for survivability, and you kind of want to hit that balance. You still want to maximize as much DPS as you can, and it's better off to kind of learn what's killing you and avoid those, basically start to learn the mechanics, things like that, of fights that are killing you, rather than invest more heavily into health, because at that point you're still giving up a lot of DPS that way. Now for our Mundstone, we're going with the Thief. The other Mundstone that you could choose is going to be the Shadow. DPS difference between two of them is going to be pretty small. Generally speaking, the higher your crit chance, the stronger the Shadow is going to become, and the lower your crit chance, the stronger the Thief is going to become. So with Siroria and Spell Strategist, we are sitting at, with all of our buffs up, we're sitting at just shy of 50% crit chance. I believe it's 48.8% crit chance. So the Thief is going to win over the Shadow here by a very small margin. If you are running something like Burning Spellweave though, then at that point the Thief and the Shadow pretty much reach parity, so they're pretty much equal in terms of DPS contribution. If you're running Mother Sorrow, then you're going to want to run Shadow. So you can really go with Thief or the Shadow. Again, DPS difference between the two of them is going to be pretty small overall. Now, for the purposes of the parse that we're doing at the end of the video, I am using parse food. So this is Gas the Eyeball, which gives me max magicka and magicka regen. This basically helps to simulate getting orbs on cooldown, and I was using blue food. In an actual raid, you would be using Witchmother's Potent Brew or Clockwork Switcher's Filet, which gives you max health, max magicka, and magicka regen. Clockwork Switcher's Filet also gives you a little bit of health regen as well. So in an actual raid, you will have that additional health. You'll have a little bit less magicka than what I have here, but you'll have a little bit less regen overall. But if you include orbs with the regen that you get from Witchmother's and Clockwork Switcher's Filet, you have greater overall regen compared to using parse food here. But parse food here basically just imitates getting orbs on cooldown and using blue food. You do get a little bit less magicka compared to using blue food, but it is a close approximation there. Now, I do want to mention here that I'm not a vampire here, but you can be a vampire if you decide to do so. So you do take more flame damage, but you also get 10% additional magicka regen when you're stage 2 and above. Plus you get the Undeath passive, which gives you a little bit of resistances, damage mitigation when you're stage 3 and above. So again, magicka DKs are very starved for magicka, so you might want to consider being a vampire for that 10% additional magicka regen to help out your sustain a little bit there. Now for our skill bars. So for our front bar, we have Molten Whip, Burning Embers, Engulfing Flames, Flames of Oblivion, Inner Light, and Shooting Star. Shooting Star, we're not really going to be using this all too often. We're mainly going to be using Standard of Might as our primary ultimate, but Shooting Star could be useful in instances where you think the boss might move out of your standard, because you can't move the standard once you put it down. So if the boss moves out of it, you're probably going to want to consider using Shooting Star instead. At the very least, with Shooting Star, you deal a lot of damage up front, and even though there is still a dot component associated with it, it's a little bit more useful for hitting mobile bosses, because at the very least, you're guaranteed to do at least some damage, compared to Standard, where if they walk out of it, you're basically not doing any damage at all. Especially because Standard, you need to stand within the Standard area in order to get that increased damage done bonus there. Our back bar, this is where we'd put our shield, but for the purpose of the parse, we're going with Ellie Drain, so this would be the light armor shield, Damp Magic, or Harness Magicka. You can pick whichever one you want. I prefer Damp Magic for the larger shield. Then we have Eruption, Blockade of Fire, Balance, or Spell Sim. I have Balance here just because I was using a tank build earlier, recording the tank build, but you can use Spell Symmetry instead, which will give you basically reduces the cost of your next magic ability by a certain amount. So Balance will give you Major Ward and Major Resolve though, which does help out your survivability a little bit. So you can really pick whichever one you want here. But again, Magicka DK Sustain, really bad, so you will be running this. I have done Parses where I was using Clockwork such as Filet, and I was getting Orbs, and I was getting Worm, and I still needed to use Balance several times in order to sustain a full 25 million W Parse, so I would recommend running Balance or Spell Symmetry on a Magicka DK. Then you have Rearming Trap for Might of Force. You're always within melee range, so you should stick with Rearming Trap, but if you want to, you can run Channel Acceleration instead. Rearming Trap will give you a little bit more sustain because you're using a secondary resource to use this. But if for some reason you're moving around a lot, let's say the boss is very mobile, then Channel Acceleration might be a better choice here, so that way you don't have to cast Rearming Trap very often, because you don't have that much stamina, even as a Dark Elf. Then our ultimate, Standard of Might. Now going over our CP points, the CP cap has not changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so the CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our 3 different constellation types. So starting off with our green CPs, 75 Arcanist, 75 Tenacity, which gives us 120 points to put into the remaining nodes, really however we'd like. So I personally have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord. Now, you can push these 2 nodes up to 100, which gives you 70 points instead to play around with. So if you do want to push that last 1 percentage point there, you can go 100-100 if you so desire. For our blue CPs, I have 66 into Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 25 into Spell Erosion, 9 Staff Expert, 66 Master at Arms, and 40 into Thaumaturge. We have a little more points into Thaumaturge because a lot of our damage as a Mag Decay are dots. Then finally for our red CPs, so this particular setup is a very balanced approach, so this will give you good mitigation across any piece of content that you intend on running, but it will not give you the best mitigation across any single piece of content. For those pieces of content, for example, if you're running Maw, you will need to kind of readjust your red CPs in order to best maximize the mitigation that you're getting. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much all of our build information here, so now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. Go ahead and pull out the 3 million dummy from behind our little thing here. So, Magicka DK. Our dots sort of have a little bit varying duration. So Blockade is 8 seconds, Eruption's 18 seconds, Engulfing Flame and Burning Embers are both 10 seconds, and then Flames of Oblivion is a 15-second duration dot. You can basically treat it as a 15-second dot. So a lot of different durations here. So we have a dynamic rotation kind of already built in for us, very similar to the Magicka Nightblade because of those differing levels of dots. The dynamic rotation will also give you more DPS overall compared to running just a straight static rotation. So the idea behind the dynamic rotation is you want to basically maximize the uptime of your dots by not recasting them early. A static rotation will usually end up recasting at least some of your dots early, not necessarily all of them. So having that dynamic rotation basically maximizes your dot uptime and maximizes, or I should say minimizes, the amount of magicka that you're wasting by recasting your dots a little bit early. So dynamic rotations will typically give you the best DPS overall. And that just kind of falls in line with the Magicka DK because, again, a lot of our abilities have very differing uptimes, differing durations here. So the thing with the dynamic rotation is that there is no set rotation, so it's really just kind of centered around maximizing your dots. So if you're on PC, I highly recommend getting an add-on that kind of tells you, that counts down the duration of your dots. So for example, Action Duration Reminder, Srendar, either of those 2 add-ons will be very useful to help maintain kind of your rotation the whole way through. So basically what you want to do is you just want to make sure you have Rearming Trap down. And you just want to make sure you're keeping an eye on your dots and kind of make sure you reapply them right when they expire. So again, you don't really have a set rotation at all, you just are kind of keeping an eye on your dot timers and recasting them before they run out here. There is 2 dots that you're going to want to maintain at all times. That's going to be Engulfing Flames and Blockade of Fire. Blockade because obviously you get the VMA bonus from the Blockade, plus you have a lot of burning uptime because you're Mag Decay, so you do want Blockade up because it does deal 20% additional damage to enemies that are burning. And Engulfing Flames you want to maintain because it provides a unique debuff so that affected enemies take 10% more damage from all fire damage. So Mag Decays, pretty much all of your damage is fire damage. So Engulfing Flames is a very powerful debuff on the enemy that helps basically improve your DPS as well as the DPS of all the other Magicka DPS around you, because it does boost flame damage. So that's Blockade, your light attacks, all of your dots basically as a DK. So those are the 2 dots that I you really want to try to maintain. Rearming Trap is another build that you want to try to keep track of because of that Minor Force uptime. Minor Force is going to be pretty strong, especially if you are in this kind of crit meta, so to speak. The other dots, not quite as important to keep up. Burning Embers, not so much. Burning Embers does also have a heal associated with it, so if you need the heal, then you can just spam Burning Embers and that'll heal you up. So if you ever need a self-heal, you can just spam Burning Embers. That way you can get the heal down. But Eruption is a very long-lasting dot, but it doesn't deal that much damage per tick. So this is one of those ones that you can pretty much leave off. You can kind of let this stay down a little bit if you absolutely have to, if you need to play mechanics or something like that there. Now in terms of when you want to drop your standard, you typically want to drop your standard once you have all your dots running. So if you're just starting the fight, you want to do Rearming Trap, then Blockade, then Eruption, then lay down your standard. That way your dots are ticking, so that way you get that additional 50% damage done right away there. You also want to try to bar swap cancel out of your standard as much as you can, because the animation is pretty long and you can't really let attack kind of weave yourself out of it. So you do want to just drop your standard and bar swap to your front bar as much as you can to kind of basically not get stuck in that and cast animation for standard there. So with all that said and done, let's go ahead and go over our 6-man dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the DPS that you can pull and kind of compare that to other DPS. Now, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, Magicka DKs kind of fall in this really weird spot where they are using Magicka as their main resource, but they are in a melee spot, so they're competing with stamina DPS for those melee spots there. So there's really no good sort of comparison point for Magicka DKs other than the Magicka DKs. Probably the best thing you want to use to compare the Magicka DK would probably be other melee classes. That being said though, even that's not an exact good comparison because you're using Magicka and stamina DPS. Basically they run different buffs, they have different modifiers, so it's not exactly a fair comparison to compare this to a melee DPS, stamina DPS, but at the same time it's not really fair to compare it to a typical ranged Magicka DPS because you're not really playing at range at all as a Magicka DK. So I would say just take this, whatever value that we get out of this parse as a face value. If you want, you can try to take a look at sort of melee standards to kind of see what numbers you should be pulling if you want to compete with that Stam Nightblade or that Stam Warden or whatever class, stamina DPS there. So that would be my recommendation to kind of look at this parse here. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So again, you do want to sort of animation cancel out of that standard dropping because that animation just takes a very long time. So we'll be bar swapping quite often because of this dynamic rotation here, because again, we want to maximize our uptimes. So we won't be swapping until it's absolutely necessary to do so. Unless, of course, it is to, maintain uptime on Engulfing Flames, because again, that's a very important dot to maintain. One thing that you're going to want to keep in mind too is with Flames of Oblivion, you want to make sure to let that run completely out before you recast, because at the very end there, it will shoot out another fireball, so you do want to basically make sure you are getting that last fireball out. Otherwise you're going to be missing on, basically you can think of it as a tick of Flames of Oblivion that way. You can also bar swap cancel out of the balance animation if you do so, if you want to do so. Again, bar swap cancel that cast animation for standard. You can see here with the dynamic rotation there will be times where you have a lot of time to basically use your Spamble, your Molten Whip. There'll be other times where you're basically just constantly bar swapping to re-up all of your dots. Alright, so there we go. That is the DPS you can expect to pull with a Magicka DK here. So we pulled just shy of 50k, so pretty nice DPS overall. It's not quite as high as Magicka Nightblade, it's not quite as high as a Pet Sork, but it's still very respectable. And again, it's not really fair to necessarily take this number compared to standard DPS, but you have to keep in mind that you are going to be competing with standard DPS for that melee spot in raid. So just keep that in mind if you're trying to compare different classes, parses, and things like that. So as you can see here, pretty much almost all of our damage is flame damage, which is why I said Silks of the Sun, Burning Spellweave. You will have very good uptime on Burning Spellweave, and Silks of the Sun, you're pretty much getting that full 400 additional spell damage. In this instance, the only sources of non-flame damage is from the Absorb Magicka enchant and Rearming Trap here. So it's basically about 5% of our DPS, just a little over 5% of our DPS comes from non-flame sources. So in terms of basically how much spell damage you're actually getting out of that 5-piece in Silks of the Sun, it's going to be 95% of 400, or about 380 spell damage there. So pretty comparable to Burning Spellweave, but Burning Spellweave, again, because it has 3 armor bonuses on 2, 3, and 4 compared to the 2 from Silks of the Sun, is going to be a little bit stronger that way. So Molten Whip is pretty strong, Blockade, Eruption, Flames of Oblivion here, Zaan is going to be really strong. Burning is a very strong dot here. You have very good uptime on Burning here, so you have 88% uptime. That's just because all that flame damage that you're doing has a chance to proc Burning here. So you can see here that we don't have very high hits, but we have a lot of different hits that are going at once, because again, Magicka DKs are very heavily reliant on their dots. So Engulfing Flames, Burning Embers, these are all dots. Flames of Oblivion can be considered a dot. That is a 15-second long duration. Eruption, Blockade, you can see that they don't hit very hard, but because they're all ticking at the same time, that's what contributes to our pretty high DPS overall. So that is pretty much it for this build of video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.